Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. India is in the middle of its biggest ever election, and guess what is trending on social media here? AstraZeneca, Covishield. Not because another wave of the Wuhan virus is upon us, but because the makers of this vaccine have told a court in London that it may cause blood clots in rare cases. This has triggered debate, fear-mongering, and accusations in India. If you've taken Covishield, should you be worried? We'll answer this question and more tonight. Meanwhile, New Delhi has hit out at a Western media report on the plot to kill Khalistani terrorist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. What were Palestinian rival groups doing in China? Beijing has released a statement. Why did China target ships from the Philippines? Why one roti costs 25 rupees in Pakistan even though inflation has been falling? Is there a foreign hand in the protests in American universities? Who is Prajwal Revanna, the Indian member of parliament whose sex tapes have sparked outrage? Why has Uganda turned away from its old lenders to get a loan from Saudi Arabia? How has Samsung recorded more than 900% in profits this year? And can you self-engineer your genes to live longer? A new study says it's possible. We'll tell you about it. The headlines first. A sword-wielding man goes on a stabbing spree in East London. A 14-year-old boy dies in the attack. Police officers are among the injured. London police arrest the 36-year-old man and rule out terrorism. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has condemned the stabbings. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his troops will enter Rafah with or without a truce. The warning comes as Hamas says they are ready to respond to the Gaza truce offer. The latest proposal calls for a 40-day ceasefire in Gaza. Egypt, Qatar and the US are mediating the truce talks. European Union launches a probe against Facebook and Instagram, expresses concerns that Meta is failing to counter disinformation ahead of EU elections in June. Leaders are especially worried about Russian attempts to manipulate public opinion. Hong Kong's big push to become a cryptocurrency hub. It starts trading of Asia's first spot Bitcoin and Ether exchange-traded funds. This follows the launch of similar products in the US. Hong Kong aims to take on Washington in the race to dominate the crypto market. And Rishabh Pant named in India's squad for the T20 World Cup in June. This will mark Pant's return to international cricket after his car crash in December 2022. BCCI picks Sanju Samson over KL Rahul as the second wicketkeeper. Rohit Sharma will captain the team, Hardik Pandya to be his deputy. Medicine and politics. Two things that you should never mix. One is based on science, the other is based on sentiment and power. So it's important to separate the two. Unfortunately, that's easier said than done. Here in India, a big showdown is unfolding. Over what? The Covishield vaccine. It was developed by a British pharma company called AstraZeneca. And what's the controversy? Around 51 lawsuits have been filed against this company, this vaccine in the UK. They say the vaccine is defective. It has caused serious injury and death. Now, AstraZeneca has denied these charges, but they did admit one thing. Their vaccine can cause blood clots in very rare cases. And cue political showdown. Pharma giants are trending on social media. Many users are questioning the government of India. They're asking, why was this vaccine approved? Who will be held accountable? One of the hashtags is this, hashtag arrest Narendra Modi. It's got tens of thousands of tweets and comments. Opposition parties have jumped on. They're pointing fingers at the government. But does this outrage make sense? What does the science say? Let's take a closer look. In India, AstraZeneca was licensed by the Serum Institute. They called it Covishield. It's not clear how many Indians got this vaccine, but we can make a calculated guess. India has administered around 220 crore doses. Close to 80% of these are said to be Covishield. Now, if you do the math, that's around 176 crore doses. Now, each person got 2 shots, so more than 80 crore Indians may have got Covishield, which is 800 million people. Should these people be worried about blood clots? The short answer is no. But this social media debate, devoid of facts and driven by politics, is dangerous. So let us bust the myths one by one. First of all, did AstraZeneca hide this? The answer is they did not. Take a look at Covishield's packaging insert. It clearly mentions the clot risk. Apparently, it was observed in very rare cases. How rare? Less than 1 in 100,000 cases. So the risk of blood clots was not hidden. It was very much in public domain. Secondly, is this risk serious? Again, let's look at the numbers. A UK study in 2022 looked at 46 million adults. And what did they find? The risk of clots was very low, less than 3 cases per million. In fact, the virus is way more serious than the vaccine. It puts you at a far greater risk of blood clotting, not the vaccine. So the benefits clearly outweigh the risk. But tell that to the anti-vaxxers. They're jumping onto this controversy. They're using it to discredit the COVID vaccine. But guess what? Many other vaccines have the same risks. The influenza vaccine, the H1N1 vaccine, even the rabies vaccine, all of them are linked to the same risk of blood clots. Should we then stop taking all of them? The answer is obvious. None of the vaccine makers claimed that their shot was perfect. They admitted it was not 100% effective. They also admitted the side effects. And so did the governments. Also, approving vaccines was never a political decision. It was taken in consultation with doctors and scientists, and India followed the same process. All vaccines were approved by the CDSCO, the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, so it is important to get the facts right. Yes, AstraZeneca has a rare side effect. Yes, that side effect can be deadly, but it's not some hidden conspiracy. The risk from COVID is still bigger and far bigger than the risk from vaccines. Do not let anti-vaxxers tell you otherwise. Having said that, could things have been handled better? Could the conversation around shots have been different? In hindsight, perhaps yes. Pharma companies could have talked about a little more about the side effects. Governments could have raised awareness. But all of this is easy to say now. Back then, things were very different. Thousands of people were dying every day. So the priority was saving lives. Everything else came second. And do not get us wrong, this does not mean that Big Pharma is the knight in shining armor. They did what they did for money. Take Pfizer, for example. They made more than $100 billion in revenue in 2022, $100 billion. Around 57 billion of this came from COVID drugs. That's vaccines plus the antiviral. Compare that to their total revenue before the pandemic. It was less than 57 billion. So Big Pharma did profit from the pandemic. The top companies made around $90 billion in profits. Pfizer alone made 35 billion. Biotech and Moderna 20 billion each. And China's Sinovac made $15 billion. You can question those windfall profits. You can ask why the vaccines were overcharged. But I'm afraid the side effect conversation is dangerous territory. The headlines do not capture the finer details. What they do is fuel vaccine hesitancy. After 3 bad years and millions of deaths, we should know better. Staying with India, the Khalistan plot is back in the news, this time thanks to the Washington Post. They've published a new article. It covers the alleged assassination plot against Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. We've talked about him before on this show. Pannu is a Khalistani separatist, a man designated as a terrorist by India. But in the US, he is a guest, a critic fleeing persecution. That's how they see him. So back in November, the US began investigating this plot. American prosecutors blamed an Indian intelligence officer. They said he plotted the killing. Now, the US did not name this Indian official, but the Washington Post did. They say it was a RAW officer named Vikram Yadav. RAW stands for Research and Analysis Wing. It's India's spy agency. Now, the article itself is quite long, but 3 things stand out. Number 1, Vikram Yadav was the point man. He apparently forwarded important details to the hitman, details like Pannu's address. Number 2, US officials believe this was a sanctioned hit. Sanctioned by whom? Then Raw Chief. And this runs contrary to the Indian version. New Delhi has ordered an investigation into these allegations. The final report is not out yet, but the probe does hint at a rogue Raw officer, someone who is acting without orders. Finally, point number 3. Potential links to the Prime Minister's inner circle. US officials think National Security Advisor Ajit Doval was in the loop. And where did all of this information come from? Unnamed Indian and American officials. That's what the Washington Post says. But India has trashed this report. Listen into what the Foreign Ministry is saying, and I'm quoting, "The report in question makes unwarranted and unsubstantiated imputations on a serious matter. There is an ongoing investigation of the high-level committee set up by the Government of India. Speculative and irresponsible comments on it are not helpful." That's what the Foreign Ministry of India has said. Let me translate that for you. India is calling this article fake news. And what about the US government? They apparently knew about the article. Washington even warned New Delhi ahead of its publication, so the White House was ready for it. They did not comment on the ongoing probe, but they did say that the matter was being taken very seriously, both in Washington and in New Delhi.
This is a serious matter, and we're taking that very, very seriously. The government of India has been very clear with us that they are taking this seriously and will investigate, and we expect that accountability from the government based on that. And so, but we're going to continue to raise our concerns. That's not going to stop. We're going to continue to raise our concerns directly with the Indian government.
A couple of things to note here. For starters, India will not appreciate this parallel investigation, certainly not by the US media. It undermines New Delhi's process and credibility. And secondly, the timing is key. US officials began this investigation in November last year. And when does this article come out? In April, during elections in India. Foreign Minister Jaishankar has already criticized Western coverage of the Indian election. This article will add to that perception. And thirdly, the US reaction to all of it. They haven't openly criticized the government of India, but they're not letting this issue go. In other words, Washington is keeping this case alive through media leaks, through investigative reports, and through subtle criticism. I guess it gives them leverage over New Delhi, but it's also a dangerous game. Look at some of the lines in this article. I'm quoting. "The foiled assassination was part of an escalating campaign of aggression by RAW against the Indian diaspora in Asia, Europe, and North America." What impression does that give? That RAW is some kind of monster going around hunting dissidents. Based on what? A lot of allegations, but zero convictions. I'll quote another line for you. "India is part of an expanding roster of countries employing tactics previously associated with China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other repressive regimes." So the strategy is quite clear. Club India with the likes of China and Iran as some sort of lawless repressive regime and tarnish India's image as the world's largest democracy. And don't get us wrong, you can conduct your own probes, you can publish your articles. I'm sure the Washington Post is confident about its sources, but why these sweeping statements? Why the judgment before the trial? It betrays the true intentions here. The goal is not to pin the blame, the goal is to smear India. To West Asia now, where the West has been trying to broker peace. Every American president worth his salt has tried to solve the Palestine issue. They haven't had much success though. Guess who may be faring better? China. Today, Beijing released a statement. It said that representatives of Hamas and Fatah met in China. No confirmation on the dates, but Beijing says it happened recently. And what was the meeting about? By the looks of it, it was about reconciliation. I have their statement with me, and here's what it says. The two sides fully expressed their political will to achieve reconciliation through dialogue and consultation, discussed many specific issues, and made positive progress. Doesn't say very much, but the fact that Hamas and Fatah met in Beijing, that they reportedly made progress and that the West had no clue about it, is quite significant. For those of you who've not followed their story, here's a quick primer. Let me show you the map of Palestine. The territory is divided into two parts, West Bank and Gaza. Fatah and Hamas are two power groups. Fatah rules the West Bank and Hamas controls Gaza. This political split happened in the year 2006. That's when elections happened in Palestine. The last election that happened in Palestine in 2006. So it was 18 years ago. The people of Gaza voted for Hamas. The people of the West Bank voted for Fatah. Then Fatah tried to broker a power-sharing agreement. It did not work. Fighting broke out. And since 2007, they've had their own turfs. Fatah has been relegated to the West Bank. Hamas had Gaza. And this also led to a lot of confusion because Hamas is seen as a terrorist organization by many, especially in the West. So when they talk Palestine, when they talk about Palestine, they talk to Fatah. No communication with Hamas. But that's what the Western players do. China makes no such distinction. They have historical ties with the Palestinians. It started with Mao Zedong. During his rule, China armed and trained Palestinian resistance groups. Since the 1960s, Beijing has maintained ties with them. First, it was the Fatah, then it was the Hamas. Between the late 1960s and early 1970s, Beijing provided $5 million to these groups. Later, as China's ties with Israel improved, their support to Palestinians dried up. Then came another realignment. This was in 2006. Beijing invited Mahmoud al-Zahir to a China-Arab Cooperation Summit. Al-Zahir was a co-founder of Hamas. The US and Israel protested, but China did not listen. In 2010, China asked Israel to stop its Gaza blockade. In 2017, China disclosed its peace plan. It called for ending Israel's illegal settler policies. Even on October 7th last year, China's tone was different from the rest. The West slammed the Hamas attack. They condemned it. But Beijing urged for calm. It asked all parties to exercise restraint. It gave no statements against Hamas. And that has been China's position ever since. It has opposed attacks on civilians without naming or blaming any side. It's called for a concrete roadmap to the two-state solution, and now it is trying to broker peace between two Palestinian rivals. Is this a sign of China's ambition, of its goal to play a bigger role in the region? We saw that with Saudi Arabia and Iran. Beijing brokered peace between the two parties. Could they do the same with Israel and Palestine? We know they're trying. Last year, China's special envoy was in West Asia. On paper, this visit was about brokering peace, but in reality, it was about a lot more. You see, the Israel-Palestine conflict is not new. It's gone on for decades. It has too many stakeholders. So brokering peace would be difficult. What China wants is not just a solution, it wants an alternative to the Western order. It wants to show that it is sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. It wants to win the trust of the Arab world. Beijing wants to be seen as a power in West Asia, similar to America, but a better one. Having said that, the Israel-Palestine conflict is very different from the Iran-Saudi one, and China has little leverage here. But for the moment, it's making all the right moves. Meanwhile, on the other side of Asia, China returns to a more familiar role, that of antagonizer. China is back to its usual antics in the South China Sea, or rather, the West Philippine Sea. Chinese Coast Guard ships were at it again. They surrounded two Philippine vessels, a Coast Guard patrol boat and a supply ship. And this was in a disputed region, known as the Scarborough Shoal. The Philippine ships were carrying out patrols and reportedly bringing food and fuel to fishermen in the area. So these were supply ships. But China did not like their presence. Two Chinese ships were pressed into action. They took to either side of the Philippine ships and then they attacked. Parts of the Philippine ship were damaged, its railing and canopy. The Philippines has raised concerns, saying these were dangerous maneuvers by China. Manila has accused Beijing of harassing its vessels. And after seeing the video, How else would you describe it? But Beijing, of course, has dreamed up an entirely different explanation.
Huangyan Island or Scarborough Shoal is an inherent territory of China. The maritime police vessels and the official vessels of the Philippines are intruding into the waters of Huangyan Island without the consent of the Chinese side, thus seriously infringing on the sovereignty of the Chinese side. In accordance with the law, the Chinese Coast Guard took the necessary measures to formally remove them. China advises the Philippine side to immediately stop its infringing and provocative actions and not to challenge China's firm determination to safeguard its sovereignty.
China says it was defending one of its quote-unquote inherent territories. It makes the Philippines sound like the aggressor, which is of course not the case. Look at the map. Scarborough Shoal lies just off the Philippine coast, barely 220 kilometers away. It falls within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. And this is a United Nations convention. A country exclusively controls the sea up to 370 kilometers away from its coast. It's their exclusive economic zone. And the Scarborough Shoal falls well within that limit for the Philippines, but China does not care. It does not follow international law. Instead, Beijing tries to peddle this, the infamous 9-dash line. China came up with this. It first published these 9 dashes in the mid-20th century, and it declared that everything within these dashes was Chinese territory. Everything within the 9 dashes belongs to China. What's the basis of this claim? Apparently, it's been like that since quote-unquote ancient times. And this ancient times argument is something that Beijing loves to use. They use it in every dispute. The Scarborough Shoal, some Japanese islands, even the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. As far as Beijing is concerned, it was all Chinese in ancient times. So China says it has a right to all these territories. These are all bogus claims. No tax collectors from Beijing were shaking down villagers here in any of the disputed areas. The 9-dash line is not even a serious border document. It looks like some child emperor's drawing, that to a child who could not draw straight lines yet. But despite this, Beijing keeps making claims based on these meaningless dashes, even though international courts have ruled that it has no legal basis. And the Philippines has borne the brunt of this. China seized the Scarborough Shoal back in 2012. It has been harassing Philippine ships ever since. And now Manila says Beijing has put up a barrier around the shoal, a 380-meter floating barrier to prevent Filipino fishermen from accessing the area. China tried this last year as well, but the Philippines cut that one down. They will probably cut down the new barrier as well. And all this just shows what a nuisance it is having China as your neighbor. It's something we in India know quite well, and we wish Manila the best of luck. And staying on the topic of annoying neighbors, our next story is from Pakistan, the military-run disaster masquerading as a dysfunctional democracy. Its people are suffering record inflation. Something as basic as bread has become unaffordable. One roti costs a staggering 25 Pakistani rupees. Inflation is well above 20%, the highest in South Asia, although things are better than they were a few months ago. Over the last 3 months, Pakistan's inflation rate has fallen by almost 9%, but their pain won't end anytime soon. Normal numbers are not expected till September 2025. That's when inflation could fall to 5%, September 2025. Until that time, the people of Pakistan are going to have it rough. Here's our report.
Pakistan's economy has had a relatively decent month, by Pakistani standards, of course. Today, it received a loan from the International Monetary Fund. The IMF approved an $11 billion loan yesterday, and it has already reached Pakistan's central bank. This is a huge relief for Islamabad, which relies on loans to repay older debts to China, to Gulf states like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and even older debts to the IMF. So today's loan was the latest boost for the country, and it caps off a better than usual month. This month began with good news on the inflation front as well. Pakistan's inflation for March was at 20.7%. While most of the world would look at this figure in horror, this is Pakistan. They saw inflation drop to just over 20%. In fact, inflation has been dropping for a few months now. It fell 3 months in a row. It was at 29.7% in December, then 28.3% in January. February saw the best drop when it fell to 23.1%, and then March capped it off with 20.7%. Pakistan's inflation rate fell by 9% in 3 months, which is some much-needed relief for the country. But this doesn't mean that everyone has benefited. Because remember, prices are still sky-high compared to just a few years ago. And this affects those at the bottom of the income chain the most. Let's take the case of the humble roti. It's a South Asian staple, a type of flatbread consumed by everyone. In Pakistan, the humble roti commands a regal price. It now costs 25 Pakistani rupees. That's a whopping 7 rupees per roti in Indian terms. Now, this isn't the cost for a roti at a restaurant or at some fancy hipster back-to-your-roots cafe. No, this is the market cost in Pakistan. It's what everyone has to bear. The people of Pakistan are reeling under these absurd prices. They've had to sit and watch essential goods slowly become unaffordable. People complain about the price of raw materials like flour. The cost of utilities like electricity, water and gas are all up, partially because of their benefactors at the IMF. The IMF issues loans but demands something in return, a removal of subsidies. Pakistan had to scrap its fuel and utility subsidies to get loans from the IMF. As a result, the common people have had to pay for their government's financial mismanagement, quite literally. The situation is so bad that 20% inflation is considered good in Pakistan. It's going to take another year and a half for things to improve. That's what Pakistan's central bank predicts. It thinks the inflation rate will reach 5 to 7% by September 2025. This means the people of Pakistan still have a rough few months ahead of them.
There's hundreds of them here today. They will not be moved. Free, free, free Palestine!
بالدم نفديك يا أقصى.
It's still chaos in US colleges. More protests, more sit-downs and more arrests. The focus is back on Columbia University in New York. Protesting students have defied orders to disband. This morning they arrived at Hamilton Hall. It's a famous landmark inside Columbia. The same hall was taken over by students in 1968. Back then, they were protesting the Vietnam War. This time, they are protesting against Israel. Like in 1968, students have barricaded and occupied this building. Take a look. The college did hold talks with the students, but no luck. So they issued an ultimatum: leave by Monday night or face suspension. As you just saw, the students chose option 2. They have not ended their protest, so the college has started suspending students. And it's the same story everywhere. More colleges are joining these protests. At North Carolina University, over 24 protesters were arrested. All the encampments were cleared out. At Texas State University, hundreds joined a sit-in protest, but no police officers were on campus. At the University of Texas, things got more violent. You can see students facing off with security officials. And in San Francisco, there was a massive rally. But again, no police in sight. It really depends on where the protest is happening. In some places, it's peaceful. In others, there are violent clashes. Like at the Commonwealth University in Virginia. Take a look. So the protests keep getting worse, but tonight we're looking beyond the pictures. First of all, what explains this outrage? Is it all organic or is there more at play? And second, what will be the impact in a very important election year? The first question is hard to answer. I'm sure some students feel strongly about Palestine, but there are outside factors too. Take a look at this Israeli media report. It talks about Qatar's donations to American colleges. And why is that important? Because Qatar supports Hamas. So in theory, the theory is that Qatari influence is behind these protests. Or maybe it's making a bad situation worse. But does this theory stand? Let's look at data first. Qatar is the biggest foreign donor to US colleges. And how much money have they given? Around $5 billion since 1986. Qatar has given around $5 billion to American universities since 1986. Most of it was given in the last decade. Some reports say this is contributing to anti-Semitism on campus. Apparently, there is a correlation. More Qatari donation, more anti-Semitism. One example is the Commonwealth University in Virginia, the one we just showed you. Qatar has donated $125 million to that college. And you saw the scenes there. A violent clash with police officers. But other reports say it's a coincidence. Just look at Cornell University. It is the top recipient of Qatari money. Some $1.5 billion since 2015. That's the kind of money they've got. But Cornell is relatively peaceful. No clashes, no anti-Semitism. So it's really hard to draw a direct link between these two variables. But yes, it is possible. Another reason is diversity. US colleges are more diverse than ever. Non-white attendance is up 185% since 1976. Around 48% students are non-white. Now, some people will give this a hateful twist. They will question the loyalty of these students, but we are not talking about that. Students of Arab descent will feel strongly about the Gaza war. The fight will be personal for them, so the passions will be high. Which brings us to the impact. Joe Biden is struggling to address these protests. He can't condemn or support them.
As far as police presence, that's up to the colleges and the universities. That's for them to decide. And we have to be able to allow Americans to peacefully protest within the law. That is important, and that's what the president wants to see. I can't comment on every case. I can't comment on everything that we're seeing out there.
Student protests do tell a lot. In the past, they've influenced US politics. So could there be a repeat this time? Well, these protests are different. Just think back to the unrest of the 1960s and 70s. Back then, the issues were American, racism and the Vietnam War. Both issues affected ordinary American people. Israel's war is not like that, which is why the rallies are limited to colleges. We've not really seen ordinary Americans hit the streets. Nonetheless, Joe Biden should be wary of this youth quake. Violent crackdowns in colleges can harden public opinion. It can also morph into a security crisis. So the president's best bet is to end the war in Gaza. Take away the cause, take away the rebellion. Over 3,000 videos, hundreds of women, one leader, and a political storm. This is a case that's dominating headlines in India, and it involves this man, Prajwal Revanna. He belongs to the political party JDS. He is the grandson of a former Indian Prime Minister, the nephew of Karnataka's former Chief Minister, so he's basically political elite. Revanna has been accused of assaulting hundreds of women. He's also been accused of recording those acts. The BJP, which is an alliance with the JDS in Karnataka, has distanced itself from this case, but the opposition is blaming them. Our next report tells you all about it.
It's election season in India. 2 phases of voting are done, 5 remain. Campaigning is in full swing. But in the state of Karnataka, there's one case that has sparked a political storm. The case of Prajwal Revanna. Revanna is a member of parliament from Karnataka. He belongs to the political party JDS. It was founded by his grandfather H.D. Devagowda, a former Indian Prime Minister. He's the nephew of H.D. Kumaraswamy, the former Chief Minister of Karnataka. His father is a legislator in the Karnataka State Assembly. So Revanna is political elite in the state, which makes this case even more grave. So what has he been accused of? The case involves thousands of explicit videos, around 3,000 of them. They were allegedly shot by Revanna. The videos are said to include hundreds of women. They were party workers, women who worked at his house, others who came to him for help. Revanna has been accused of assaulting all these women. He was also accused of shooting these acts. Plus, there's a police case. A woman has accused Revanna and his father of sexual assault. So what is Revanna saying? He has long denied any involvement. In 2023, he moved court for a gag order. It was to stop the spread of what he called fake videos. Even now, he continues to deny the claims. He says the videos are doctored, but the MP has apparently left the country. Reports suggest he's in Germany right now. So what is the Karnataka government doing? Currently, it has ordered a probe. Right now, the state is ruled by the Congress. Its government has set up an SIT, that's a special investigation team. It will look into the case. Meanwhile, the JDS has suspended Revanna. It's also tried to distance itself from the case.
We will not going to take any protection. We will not going to take any protection by telling some reasons. We will take severe action. But only thing, government responsibility is more. Not only as an uncle, as a citizen of this country, a common man of this country, we have to move for that. This is shameful issue. I am not protecting any person.
So has the BJP. The ruling party at the centre has an alliance with the JDS in Karnataka. Ahead of the polls, they say they have no connection to the videos. But that hasn't stopped this from turning into a political slugfest. Both sides are trading barbs.
कुछ समय पहले 3 दिनों के लिए मैं अपनी बेटी से मिलने गई। प्रधानमंत्री जी, गृह मंत्री जी बोलने लगे कि प्रियंका गांधी विदेश में गई है। जहां मैं जाती हूं इनको पता चल जाता है, जहां विपक्ष के नेता जाते हैं इनको पता चल जाता है। लेकिन इस तरह का अपराधी, इस तरह का राक्षस इस देश को छोड़ के चले जाता है और इनको पता नहीं चलता। हम कैसे यकीन कर सकते हैं इस बात पर? सब चीज, हर जानकारी इनके पास जाती है। सब नेताओं पे ये ध्यान रखते हैं कौन कहां जा रहा है, क्या कर रहा है। और इतना बड़ा अपराध करके इनके नाक के सामने कोई देश से भाग गया और ये कुछ नहीं कह रहे हैं।
कांग्रेस पार्टी जो हम पर आरोप लगाना चाहती है, मैं छोटी सी बात पूछना चाहता हूं। वहां सरकार किसकी है? सरकार कांग्रेस पार्टी की है। फेक वीडियो आपके ध्यान में ही होंगे क्योंकि टाइम पर रिलीज किए गए हैं। और अब तक कार्यवाही कांग्रेस पार्टी ने क्यों नहीं की? कार्यवाही हमने नहीं करनी है। ये लॉ एंड ऑर्डर का इश्यू स्टेट का इश्यू है।
The BJP blames the Congress government for not taking enough action. Meanwhile, the Congress says the BJP was involved. It says the BJP helped Revanna leave the country. It staged a protest this morning in the city of Bengaluru. Soon, scuffles broke out between Congress and JDS workers. With election season in full swing in India, this political storm is unlikely to die down anytime soon.
Our next story is about Africa, about the East African nation of Uganda. Uganda is a developing country, home to about 47 million people, all looking towards progress. So Uganda needs investments to boost its economy, investments or at the very least loans. Traditionally, they've relied on loans from the World Bank, the global financial body based in the US and Washington, D.C. But now it seems Uganda has cut ties with the World Bank. It has found a new lender, Saudi Arabia's Islamic Development Bank. Uganda's finance minister was on a trip to Riyadh. He was there to attend the bank's annual meeting and to take part in negotiations. And today, their finance ministry put up this message. They've secured a loan from the Islamic Development Bank, a loan worth $295 million. The funds are earmarked for construction projects. They will go towards developing a bridge in Uganda, a bridge across a part of the Nile River. And that's not all. They will also use the Saudi money to build roads to improve connectivity. Now, all of it sounds basic enough. So why did they have to go to Saudi Arabia for this? Why not call their old friends at the World Bank? Because the World Bank has been trying to impose its will on Uganda. The country passed a law last year called the Anti-Homosexuality Act 2023. It's one of the world's harshest anti-homosexuality laws. When this law was enacted, the World Bank froze loans to Uganda. This was last year. The World Bank is now tying new funding to protections for Uganda's LGBTQ community. Now, even if the motives are good, this is blatant interference. It is still the West imposing their morals on Uganda. And we've seen time and again how the world is getting fed up of Western preaching. And Uganda is no different. So instead of accepting the World Bank's conditions, they've gone ahead and found a new partner, someone who won't hand out lectures along with the loans. That's Saudi Arabia's Islamic Development Bank. They're keeping it quite simple, focusing on the business side of things, which is why Uganda's finance minister went to Riyadh instead of Washington, and Saudi Arabia is playing it smart here, taking a leaf out of China's book. Because for a while, China was becoming the lender of choice for Africa. Chinese loans were entering almost every part of the African continent. Beijing would hand out loans, no questions asked, no preaching, no lectures, just business. But Chinese loans were always a risky bet. You could get development, but more often, you'd get saddled with a debt trap. And eventually, you have to default. Africa is full of examples of this. So for a long time, African nations had just two options: Western loans and the morality lectures that came with them, or Chinese loans and the risk of default. Now it seems there's a third option, and that is Saudi Arabia. We still don't know for sure how this will work out in the long run. While Riyadh is not likely to give lectures, there is no guarantee that it won't pull a China. But for now at least, Saudi Arabia seems to be doing all it can to promote itself as an economic powerhouse. It is presently hosting a special session of the World Economic Forum. We told you about this yesterday, how the world's business leaders have gathered in Saudi Arabia's capital. So it's no coincidence that Uganda signed its $295 million deal in Riyadh on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum meeting. It's another sign that Saudi Arabia is planning to shake up the world economy. The 20th century was all about oil, but the 21st century is about chips. In other words, semiconductors. They are running your life. Chips are in your phone, your car, your weapons. Modern life cannot function without them. So governments are investing billions. Nations want to get ahead in the global chip race. But do you know who's the actual winner? The companies making the chips. So far, there are only a few major players, and their reigning champion is Samsung Electronics. The South Korean tech giant, it is the world's largest memory chip maker, and now it has seen profits jump by 933%. Samsung's operating profit hit $4.8 billion. This is in the first 3 months of 2024. It's a jump of more than tenfold compared to last year. Here's a report.
2023 was tough on Samsung Electronics. This is a tech giant, the flagship subsidiary of the Samsung Group, which is South Korea's largest family-controlled conglomerate. In 2023, the electronics industry was still reeling from a post-COVID slump, so Samsung took a hit as well. It reported record losses. But now, the company has made a comeback. And how? In the first 3 months of this year, that is the first quarter of 2024, its operating profits jumped by nearly 933%. It earned a profit of $4.8 billion. That's a tenfold jump. Meanwhile, its overall revenue rose to $52 billion. That's an increase of 13%. This is a phenomenal turnaround. How did it happen? There are two main reasons. For starters, the prices of chips have recovered after the post-pandemic slump. And secondly, there's a greater demand for artificial intelligence-related products. Let's discuss both these factors and how they affect Samsung. Here, chips refer to semiconductors. These are among the most important components of the global economy. What are semiconductors? They are wafer-thin circuits. They're used in most modern technology, from mobile phones to kitchen appliances, televisions, cars, and even weapons. Chips have become crucial for our existence, which means they are crucial for economies. Now, governments are investing billions in them. A global chip race is underway, so semiconductors are big money. Their prices saw a severe downturn last year, but now they have rebounded. Global memory chip prices have risen by a fifth in the last year. And who benefits from this? Companies that make these chips, like Samsung. It's the world's largest maker of memory chips, so it has gained from the huge demand. But that's not all. The second factor behind its profits is artificial intelligence. Companies are developing AI models at breakneck speed. These models are only becoming more complex. With that, they are consuming more information. Their datasets are becoming larger. And where do they store this information? In memory chips. AI models need memory chips that can cater to their workload. Again, Samsung has come to the rescue. And yet again, it has benefited. So you may see AI companies bleeding money, innovating, crashing, then innovating again. But Samsung is earning from both their wins and losses. And according to the company, its joys don't cease here. The company expects business conditions to remain positive in the second half of 2024 as well. After the 2023 it had, Samsung should hope that its fortune-telling skills are just as good as its chip-making ones.
What are some of the world's greatest rivalries? You may say Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier or Batman versus Joker. But ask any scientist and they will most likely say nature versus nurture. Both shape us, but which one has greater influence? For centuries, this question has puzzled scientists. Research has drawn a clear line between the two, between heredity and experience. And scientists have demanded a champion. In 1874, an English researcher shared a groundbreaking finding. He famously said, when nature and nurture compete for supremacy, the former proves the stronger, meaning genes will always come out on top. After all, genetics influence our height, weight, and habits. They shape our mental and physical health. They affect our likelihood of developing health problems, from cancer to depression and obesity to Alzheimer's disease. It's all in the genes. But over the past few decades, there has been a shift in thinking. Drawing a clean line between nature and nurture has become tricky, and scientists say that genetics is only half of the discussion. Now, a new study is out, the first of its kind, and it says that lifestyle and genetics are intertwined, meaning your lifestyle choices can influence how your genes function, and by extension, how your body functions. So what kind of choices are we talking about? Eating well, avoiding cigarettes, getting adequate sleep, and being physically active. Managing stress and developing positive social relationships. It's a tough ask. But if we get most of them right, most of the times, there is a big reward. We may be destined for the path laid out by DNA, but our everyday choices can tweak that path. Let's say you have life-shortening genes. In that case, a healthy lifestyle can counterbalance genetics. It can offset the impact of genes by 62% and add 5 years to your life. Vice versa, the same is true. If you do not have the genetic risk of early death, but if you lead an unhealthy life, then your choices can influence your genes and increase the risk of early death by 78%. And if you have a cocktail of both, unhealthy lifestyle and shorter lifespan genes, then you have double the risk of early death. And this is not just theoretical. Let me show you some numbers. Every year, 41 million people die globally due to genetics and unhealthy lifestyles. 41 million people. That's 74% of all deaths globally. Now, this study may sound depressing, but it has a brighter side. It shows us that the food we put in our bodies, the exercise we get, the chemicals we are exposed to, and our social environments can alter our health. And I say alter because they can physically alter our genes. You see, the human genome is dynamic. Genes can turn on or off, depending on the signals they receive from the body. So the choices you make are like a remote control. They can control genes to an extent. So for someone with obesity genes, for instance, it may be difficult to lose weight, but it's not impossible. People can self-engineer their genes. Humans have 1,500 genes that are on or active. Lifestyle choices affect 1,200 of them. They can also influence 21,000 other genes that are off or inactive. For instance, if men adopt a healthy lifestyle or do physical activity, reduce stress and maintain a healthy diet, they can turn off genes associated with prostate cancer. Instead, they can switch on the genes that cause cancer cells to destroy themselves. And the same principle applies to many other diseases. This is both sobering and encouraging. It shows that we're not completely at the mercy of our genes. In many ways, our genes depend on our decisions and habits. But as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Tokyo marks 70 years of Godzilla, a fictional monster that is also a tourism ambassador of Japan. Flash floods sweep away homes and cars in Kenya, and Chinese astronauts return to Earth after a 6-month stay in space. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life in an underground bunker as Soviet troops closed in on Berlin. Soon after his death, Nazi Germany surrendered to Allied forces. It marked the end of the Second World War. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.